I was an engineer working on the construction of the Deseret Generation and Transmission Bonanza Power Plant in northeastern Utah. Housing was almost impossible to find. It was boom times out there by Vernal, and I finally found a brand new house high up on a hill in a little community called Miners Basin. The rent was very reasonable, and I couldn't believe that I was so fortunate to have found that house that's set up on a hill. I was telling my workmates about this, and one of them, an Ore Indian, came up to me afterward and he said, "David, do not move into that house. The land that it sits on is cursed, and you will regret ever living there." "What do you mean the land's cursed?" He says, "Sit down and I will tell you the story of how the land became cursed." I sat down and he told me that several hundred years ago, the Spanish explorers came through Miners Basin and they discovered gold and silver. They enslaved Indians from a local village, and they forced the Indians to work in the mines digging the gold and silver out of the mountain. If perhaps one of the Indians might die for whatever reason, they disrespectfully took that Indian's body and cast it into an open pit. And when the wind blew out of the southwest, the town was covered with the stench of rotting flesh, reminding the Indians of what could happen to them if they disobeyed their captors. Then he said that Owl Woman, a magic woman, a medicine woman, had the power of herb knowledge, and she knew of a certain herb that would paralyze a body and make a person unable to defend himself. The Indians always cooked for the Spaniards, and so they mixed these herbs in with the food that the Spaniards ate. And once the Spaniards were under the influence of this drug and unable to move their limbs, unable to hardly breathe, the Indian braves took their own swords and they chopped off the heads of all of the Spaniards that had held them captive. And then Owl Woman caused that this open pit be covered up. She took a bone knife, she went over to that sacred burial ground, and she cursed the land on top of that hill that no man might linger long. And she sealed that curse by thrusting a bone knife into her heart and spilling her blood on the ground. That Indian told a good story, but I was desperate for a place to live. The house was inexpensive, and I didn't believe in curses. But do you know, from the very first day I moved into that house, when I was in the bedroom, I heard footsteps going across the living room floor. I'd run down the hallway and look, but nobody would be there. Then as I stood there looking, I heard doors opening and closing in the bedroom back down the hallway. These kind of things went on day after day, playing with my mind. And then I invited my friends over for Super Bowl Sunday. I had a brand new 36-inch television. I couldn't wait to watch the game with my friends. I had plenty of libations. I had barbecue ribs. I had barbecue chicken wings. I had potato salad and lots of dips and chips. It was going to be a wonderful day. And while we were cheering our team, we were laughing, we were having the best of fun, we heard a horrible noise coming from the kitchen right behind us. We turned and we looked, and we saw the contents of the cupboards flying out of the cupboards onto the floor. Plates and pans were spinning around. And then, as if in an explosion, the refrigerator door blew open, and all of the contents came out of the refrigerator and smashed against the cupboards on the opposite side of the room. My friends were horrified. They fought with each other, running down the stairs, each one wanting to be the first out of the door, and they ran away, jumped in their cars, and drove off, leaving me alone. and frightened. It took me all the rest of that day into the evening to clean up the house, and I wondered if I should just go get in my truck and go get a motel room for the night. But I didn't believe in curses. I didn't believe in ghosts. And so that night I laid down on my bed, fully clothed with my boots on. I pulled the blanket up over my shoulders and I laid there staring out into the darkness. It was so dark. And the wind was gusting and blowing outside. And I just felt such a weary, awful, cold feeling. And that's when I heard something in the living room, just down the hallway. I heard like the scraping of feet on the plastic corrugated runner that I put down on the carpet in the hall to protect the carpet from my muddy boots. The sliding of feet coming down the runway. And as though that wasn't scary enough, I heard what sounded like an old Indian woman cursing in her native language, and she was saying, "Neyahata nahatake. Neyahata nehatake. Neyahata. And she kept saying it over and over as I heard her coming closer and closer to the threshold of my bedroom door, which stood wide open, and I laid there on the bed and I brought the covers up to my eyes, and I knew then what it was like to be scared, stiff. I couldn't move. I wanted to reach for the light above the bedside table, but I realized that just the day before I moved it all the way over to the bedside table on the other side of the bed. And there I lay, and I heard the voice, and I was so frightened, I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. And that's when I heard her feet come off of the plastic runner, and she stepped into the threshold of the room, and my nostrils became inflamed with the stench of rotting flesh, and I knew not what to do, so I bolted up out of bed. I threw my legs over the side and put my feet on the floor. I covered my head and I screamed, "No!" I waited for the dagger to stab me in the back. I waited for my throat to be cut. I smelled the stench of rotten flesh, and I just sat there with my head covered. And then gradually the smell dissipated. Time went by, and I finally got the nerve to take my hands away from my head. And I thought, all I need to do is get to my feet and reach to the closet and turn on the light. And I knew if I turned the light on, she would be right there. And I would die. But I had to turn the light on. And so I put the switch in my fingers. Click! The room was empty. There wasn't anybody there. Oh, what an awful nightmare I'm having. Oh, I can pinch myself. If it hurts, it'll mean I'm awake. Ah! Ow! Oh, that hurt. I am awake. Maybe she's under the bed, waiting for me, gonna grab me by my feet and drag me under the bed. And I looked down, and that's when I saw a feather laying on the floor. I reached down, I grabbed the feather, and looked at it. It was an owl feather. My mind went crazy, and I bolted from my bedroom, ran down the hallway, and I could feel the cold, ghostly breath of Owl Woman chasing me down the hall. I ran down the stairs, unbolted the door, ran through the door outside, slammed the door, and I ran towards my truck, jumped in the cab. Oh, thank goodness I left the keys in the ignition. I started the truck, pounded in the clutch, put the truck in reverse, popped the clutch, and the tires, the back axle just chattered and chattered down the driveway into the street. I pounded on the brake, I pushed the clutch, I put the truck in first gear, and I sped down that road, leaving ever so quickly, leaving that cursed house. I threw the clutch in, pulled it in the second gear, and I raced down the road away from Miners Basin. I had to get away from Miners Basin. I had to. I just had to. And I never went back. Well, until recently. You see, had I not kept the evidence of what happened to me that night, I would of course rationalize that I really had been dreaming, but I kept the evidence, the feather of an owl, and still doubting my mind, still doubting, I decided to go to Miners Basin just outside of Mazer, and I drove up the hill towards where there used to be a house on top of the hill. When I got there, all there was the cold concrete foundation of where a house used to be. I had no doubt that the curse was true, that no man would linger long